Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. In today's episode, we are in Train World, which is a really cool museum here in the heart of Brussels, and more precisely in the Schaarbeek region of Brussels. And what I like about this museum is that it has trains that are really historical. And as you know, trains are really big. They're really impressive when you look at them. And they also have an exposition of the royal family trains, the royal trains of Brussels. And yes, you get to go inside some of them, but they are really beautiful. It's exceptional. You don't get to see this stuff in many parts of the world, so yeah, I thought I'd share this. But yeah, without any further ado, let's explore. Train World is a railway museum in Brussels, Belgium, and the official museum of the National Railway Company of Belgium. It is situated in the preserved buildings of Schaerbeek railway station and in a new warehouse-style building built to its north. The museum opened in September 2015 with a surface of over 8,000 square meters and 22 locomotives on permanent display. Also inside the museum are 1,200 other train-related objects, including an original 19th century railway bridge. The museum starts in the old Schaerbeek station, which has been completely restored and shows off how the station used to be in the late 19th century and early 20th century. The initial hall displays many miniature trains, as well as a royal carriage that is a true sight to see. Right outside the old station, there's a small railway garden which connects the old station to a new industrial hangar. In that little outside garden, there's a couple of locomotives on display, as well as older trainway objects, including an interesting display of train wheels on tracks. It's without too much of a surprise that Belgium has such a nice museum of trains because, well, they were one of the pioneers of trains here in Europe. Even though trains were invented in England, well, they were brought to the continent of Europe in 1835, where they built the first railroad track in Europe that went from Brussels to Mechelen. And this actually revolutionized the way that trains were thought of because, well, once they saw that that railroad track worked, well, they started expanding it pretty much all over Europe. And it's also kind of crazy to think that all of these really mastodontic machines are not electric powered. They are powered by coal and by steam. And yeah, they're really huge. And when you look at the apparatuses that were used, it's just really genius the way that they thought of it and how coal would go and transform into steam and make these really big things, well, move so fast. And it's just really beautiful to actually be able to see them, to touch them, and to even go in some of these old trains. Belgium's railway network is the oldest on the European continent. Both industry and the state played their part and invested in the development of the network and the building of locomotives. Even though nowadays trains are usually powered by electricity, it was the invention of the steam locomotive that revolutionized the whole industry. The way that steam engines work is that they fuel the locomotive by burning combustible material, such as coal, oil, and in very seldom cases wood, to heat water in the locomotive's boiler to the point where it becomes gaseous and its volume increases 1,700 times. One of the nicest locomotives I saw in the first hall is the Belgian State Railways Type 51 locomotive, which was built by various manufacturers from 1866 to 1905. This type of locomotive has an outside frame with cylinders located inside the frame. One thing that maybe people don't really think about when they're on a train is the fact that, well, there's railroad tracks, and because the railroad tracks are really long, they weren't very easy to build. And when they first introduced trains, well, we used to have wood tracks and wooden wheels, but then later on they had steel tracks and wooden wheels, and then finally steel wheels and steel tracks, which really made trains run smoother and faster. And because of that too, well, the railroad tracks were long and they needed to have switches because, well, the train tracks were going through different places all over the country and the continent of Europe and other places of the world. So yeah, they had to come up with many different signs and many different types of ways to make the rails and the trains function very smoothly. But it is really amazing to be able to see all of this piece of history right here in one place. As iron-railed plateways became more common in the 18th century, cast iron components were made to build switches with check rails. Prior to the widespread availability of electricity, switches at heavily traveled junctions were operated from a single box constructed near the tracks through an elaborate system of rods and levers. The levers were also used to control railway signals to control the movement of trains over the points. Throughout the years, the rail switch and the ways to make a train go from one rail to another has truly evolved immensely. When I'm standing in a room like this, I always feel in awe because you can tell that it's filled with so much history. It's almost like entering an old pyramid back in the day and discovering all these old relics and these old treasures. But yeah, to think that all of these things in this room were once part of trains, of train stations, of maybe different collections, and they're really, really beautiful. There's a bunch of watches, there's a bunch of things that I don't really know exactly what the use is, but you can tell that it's part of something that was used probably in a train station. But yeah, it's beautiful to look at them, and obviously they did put some sort of barrier in some of the places because some of the more expensive things you're not supposed to touch them. But I love coming to museums because you are surrounded by history, and Belgium definitely has the history of trains. One of the rooms that I really want to highlight inside the museum is a room filled with many different types of clocks. Trains hold a very important part in the history of time because it's thanks to them that railway time was standardized throughout the world. It was first applied by the Great Western Railway in England in November 1840. This was the first recorded occasion when different local mean times were synchronized in a single standard time applied. This clock room, as well as the adjacent room filled with old treasures from different stations around Belgium, really shows how important and widespread the train networks had become through Belgium, but also the rest of Europe as well as England and America. Thanks to the train revolution and railway time, they were able to overcome the confusion caused by having non-uniform local times in each town, station stops along the expanding railway network, and to reduce the incidence of accidents and near misses, which were becoming more frequent as the number of train journeys increased. Wow, look at the size of this wheel. It's huge. It's taller than me, and the train itself is much taller than me, and it's so long, and this is just one part of the train. If it's on an actual railway track, it's going to be even longer. But it's kind of crazy to think that these things move at such high speeds and that they were invented in a time when they didn't have all this modern technology of nowadays. This was the modern technology of the time, and really this must kind of feel in some way how you would feel if you saw a dinosaur in front of you, because it's super duper intimidating just because of the sheer size of it. In this particular room of the museum, there are 3 trains on display: the Cockerel Type 12, the Automotrice AM35, and the Autorail Type 551. My favorite train out of all of them, but also the biggest one of the lot, is the giant-like Cockerel Train Type 12 locomotive, which were produced for the Belgian Consortium of Locomotive Construction. The locomotive bodies were fully streamlined except for openings to provide access to the valve gear and the crankshaft. The design included inside cylinders, but outside valve gear to reduce oscillation. The train was designed to be fast, relatively lightweight, and was made to do the 124-kilometer journey between Brussels and Ostend. One thing that I do appreciate in this museum is the fact that they actually let you go into some of the older trains, of course not all of them, but it is really fun to see these old style trains and how everything was made out of wood, and it really does feel comfortable. I must say that even though this is really nice in wood, trains nowadays, at least in Belgium, are still super comfortable. To me, they are the best way to go from one point to the other. They're usually pretty quiet and you get to relax, read a book and other things. But yeah, I appreciate coming into these trains and seeing historically how beautiful they were. They were real pieces of art. The interior of the train is from a locomotive called Type 551, originally Type 622, which was a type of rail car of the Belgian National Railway Company, SNCB. These are light single-box rail cars designed by Brussels in the 1930s to replace steam traction on omnibus trains running on SNCB secondary lines. In another train close to the 551, there's another train which shows off a bit more how people used to travel in the first half of the 20th century. All the interiors have compartments made out of wood, and the more private compartments have all been decorated with different themes. I found it pretty fun and interesting that each compartment had a theme, because it once again reminds people that these trains really permitted people to go to places which had completely different cultures and weathered them from their initial point of travel. A very interesting feature that we have here in the museum is the fact that we have a crossing keeper house that is in the middle of the museum. Well, the crossing keeper used to be a very important part of the railway stations because, well, they were in charge of, well, helping people cross from one side of the rail track to the other. But since the 1960s, well, little by little, they've started to disappear, and the last railway crossing agent was in 1999. But because, well, this museum is built at the Gare of Schaarbeek, they built it around some of the older structures, and they decided to keep this structure right here, so you get to see the gate crossing keeper house. It is really cool. We're also able to go inside and to see how they lived. But yeah, it is a quaint little house, and they used to have them at pretty much all the major railway stations, and of course at the crossing places where people needed to cross from one side to the other, and there was dangerous streets and stuff like that. So it was very, very important back in the day. Seeing how the crossing keeper lived and being able to go into his house is a pretty interesting experience. From the older furniture to the bedroom and kitchen display, walking in the house feels like traveling back in time. In the entrance hall of the house, they also have an interesting display of many of the different hats that the crossing keeper would wear, which really shows how much diversity there was in their fashion according to what station or region they were stationed at. Next to the house, in a slightly more hidden display, there's an actual deportation wagon where between July 1942 and September 1944, 25,484 Jews and 352 Gypsies had been deported to the extermination camp of Auschwitz. These trains are a very sad part of history, and seeing this display did leave me with a very heavy heart. But I'm glad that the museum is displaying the good but also touching on bad points of history because they are important to be spoken about and remembered. Another sort of eerie but also interesting section in this area of the museum are the multiple displays of older luggage stacked up in various places. Looking at the luggage and how it was transported really shows how things have changed with time. Even the luggage are made out of very different material from what they would use nowadays. But I must say the luggage does look pretty well kept for being so old. Belgium has a royal family, and because of that, well, they have a bunch of royal trains. I did mention it a little bit earlier on in this video. It's really cool. You're not really allowed to go inside the trains, but the windows are very clear and you're able to see inside of these trains. And as you can see from what I'm filming, well, it looks more like a living room than an actual train in itself. So it's very, very comfortable to be traveling in one of these trains, but obviously it's only for the royal family and important people and guests. But it is still really beautiful to see them, and the fact that also they are being held here and they're preserved. And yeah, actually traveling in this kind of condition doesn't really feel like traveling at all to me. It's probably like just being in your own house, relaxing, sleeping, doing whatever you're doing at your house, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a new country, in a new place. I wish I could travel this way. Even though the royal trains look gorgeous, a lot of preventative conservation had to be done in recent years. The trains had been poorly stored for a long time, and because of that the interiors and exteriors had been damaged from the climate, the ventilation, the pollution, and the sunlight hitting them for decades. After restoring them, and in order to keep them in that condition, a sophisticated airing system was put into place via tubes to make sure that the locomotives remain well ventilated and keep a low level of humidity. And I must say that they are beautiful. From the royal coaches that served for King Leopold III and King Baudouin, we can see gorgeous carriages that range from dining room coaches to drawing rooms, private restroom compartments, sleeping coaches, full kitchens and living rooms. Adjacent to the trains are a couple of busts showing members of the royal family, which are all very well sculpted. For the final part of the museum, there's a simulation where one can play a short game in which one takes the role of a conductor on a high-speed train, as well as a couple of full-size fronts of various types of bullet trains. We've seen old trains, we've seen new trains, and we've even seen some royal trains. As you guys can see, well, Train World truly has a lot to offer. If you're ever in Brussels, I really recommend you guys to come see it with your own eyes. It's really different seeing these trains and how big they are, well, when they're right in front of you. And yes, right now we're outside the Schaerbeek station. And on a last note, I also wanted to show you guys that next to the Schaerbeek station and the museum, well, there is a small hostel which is called the Train Hostel, and they have a train on the top floor that's embedded in the building. I thought that's a pretty interesting architectural thing to see here. But yeah, I think that this is the perfect place to end this video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed coming on this visit of Train World with me, and if you did enjoy it, please be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, leave me a comment too, let me know what other videos I should do in the future, and maybe I could make them happen. Okay, well that's it. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.